So welcome to our webinar on
Recording in progress.
Welcome to our webinar on Making Democracy Work in the series. This is about local redistricting. Today, we are very fortunate to have Ricardo Ibarra with us, and he will be providing a simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. To access the Spanish version of this presentation, please click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select Spanish. The Spanish translation is only available to Zoom participants. It will not be available through the live streaming on YouTube or Facebook. And we will repeat these instructions again for those who arrive later. So welcome to our presentation. This local redistricting presentation is being co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Marin County, the League of Women Voters of Sonoma County, and LWVSC. We're very glad that you could join us today. So that we know more about who's in our audience, we would like all of you to complete a quick poll. When the poll comes up on the screen, please click one of the following choices, and I will read the choices. I know very little about redistricting, but want to know more. I am familiar with the term redistricting and know a little about it. I have a good understanding of redistricting. I have an in-depth understanding of redistricting. So please take a few minutes to fill out that poll, and in a minute, we'll give you the results. Okay, we'll give you just a few more seconds to fill out that poll. So it looks like we have a real mixture here. Some people are brand new. About 19% of you know very little about redistricting. Over half of you are familiar with the term redistricting and want to know more. So you're in the right place today. And some of you have a very good understanding of redistricting, and we're hoping you'll still learn something new today. And we have a few people, 5%, who have an in-depth understanding. So we'll invite you to be the next people on our panel. So go ahead and take the poll down. Okay, so we are going to proceed through our presentation, and we have our first slide up, so here we go. In today's presentation, you'll learn a lot about how redistricting is supposed to work. But equally important is, why does local redistricting matter? No matter our color, our background, or zip code, voters should pick their leaders, not the other way around. We come together every decade to draw new lines that give each of our votes equal weight and each of our voices equal stature, each of our communities equal access to decision-making processes that determine funds for things such as our schools, hospitals, and other essential services that our government allocates. Or at least that's the way it's supposed to happen. Today, unfortunately, a handful of politicians in states across our country work in earnest to rig the process and draw the districts to serve their political interests instead of our community interests. But we are determined that that's not going to happen here. If we all work together, we will ensure that the voters get to pick our leaders. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. We're very fortunate to have an excellent group of presenters today. We have Rohnert Park City Manager Darrin Jenkins, who recently led his city through a move from at-large elections of city council members to district elections. Like other cities, Rohnert Park will be using the 2020 census data to adjust those districts. So he's very familiar with the required steps and best practices. We also have Jim Masters, who's a league member at the Sonoma County League, and he's an expert on redistricting. He is providing technical assistance in 14 states on how to use the census data for accurate redistricting. Next is Scott McKown, and he is the chair of the Marin County League's Redistricting Committee, and he has done extensive research on local redistricting. Next, we have Wakeley, who is the current president of the Marin County League. She is passionate about voting rights and is very knowledgeable about how redistricting impacts our voting rights. Karen Weeks is the Voter Services Committee Chair for the Sonoma County League, and that is our committee that's dealing with local districting in Sonoma County. I'm Deborah McKay, and I'm the current Secretary of the Sonoma County League and a member of the Marin Sonoma Joint Making Democracy Work Planning Committee. And that's who's bringing you this presentation today. So I want to do a quick reminder for those who may have arrived a little later about how to access the Spanish interpretation of this presentation. So to access the Spanish version, please click the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and select Spanish. I also want to talk about questions because we're hoping this presentation will generate some questions. We will not be answering questions until the end of the presentation. So that we're sure to get your questions, please put any questions you may have in the Q&A. And at the end of the event, we'll remind you of that again, because we do want to get to as many questions as we can. For everyone who registered through Zoom, we will be sending you the links to our league web pages, where you will find much more information about redistricting, as well as our email addresses. So relax and enjoy the presentation. If you want to watch the presentation again, it will be available on our league's YouTube channel in a few days. So we're going to start off with Jim.
Thank you, Debbie. Next. So an elected official who was elected for an entire area, like a U.S. senator, is considered to be at large. Most elected officials are elected from political districts. These are also called election districts, legislative districts, voting districts, and that's a smaller part of a city, county, region, or state. These districts are created to make sure that the people living in them can vote for candidates who will represent them on a lawmaking body, like a school district, a board of trustees, a city council, a state assembly, or the U.S. Congress. Generally, only voters who live in a district can vote in an election for that district. Next. So why is districting important? District boundaries define populations that decide elections. They impact all of our lives by determining who is going to represent us in Congress, the legislature. They influence how public resources are allocated. And a crucial factor, the lines you get in 2022 will, in most states and locations, last until 2032. So the U.S. Constitution requires that political districts have the same number of people. Are we ready for the next slide? There you go. This is called population equality and is related to the one person, one vote concept. The goal is to make sure that each member of the U.S. Congress represents the same number of people across the country, currently about 742,000. Each smaller states with smaller populations than that, with fewer people living in them, they each get one representative, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Alaska. So the requirement is not absolute population equality. For congressional districts, you can have about a 1% variation before it begins to create court challenges. For sub-state districts, you can have up to 5% variation either way, a 10% range. So the concept of population equality, however, carries down from congressional districts to all the sub-state districts in most states, including California. So let's look at the population requirements. And the next slide. We have 4 districts, and we started out in the 2012 districting process. Each has 5 people. Next slide. There we go. So each elected official from each district represents the same number of people. So drawing districts so that there are equal numbers of people make sure that every person is represented in our government. So these political districts include all residents, not just voters, so that everyone is counted and represented. Next slide. So the population can change over time. People move from one area to the other. Some regions grow in population, others have fewer people living there. Let's look at these changes. Because of this, political districts develop, in the next slide, uneven changes over the years and are no longer equal. People move. We see that people have moved from the left-hand districts to the right-hand districts, and there's no political implication for that movement. So every 10 years, the federal government counts everyone in the country, our US Census. It's mandated by the Constitution that to determine more equal numbers of people in districts across the country. It provides data that affects our communities for the next decade, and it provides a snapshot of our nation, who we are, where we live, and much more. So when the census wraps up, district boundaries are redrawn to even out the size of each district. This is called redistricting or districting, and it happens at all levels of government. In California, district boundaries are redrawn for our representatives in Congress, the state assembly and the state senate, and hundreds of county boards, city councils, and school boards. Next arrow, please. Next slide, please. So we redraw the districts and based on the census data. Next slide. So the next slide, we see that the blue dotted lines represent the old district boundaries. And then the next slide, we see the black lines coming in to represent the new district boundaries. Hit the next slide, and we see that the old boundary lines disappear when the new ones are adopted. So we hit the next slide, and we see that once again, the population is evened out with each of the new districts containing 6 people. Next slide. So the census data release triggers the process in most jurisdictions. The census data came out in legacy format on August 14, and they're coming out in the final format supposedly on September 16, but no later than September 30. So in California, we have an additional step that allows people in state prisons to be counted in the communities where they previously lived. So they are counted in their homes rather than in the area where the prison is. However, federal prisoners, college students, are counted where they lived as of April 1, 2020. So at all levels, there's a public input process that has already started in California well before the census data were available, that asks people to talk about their communities of interest, their neighborhoods, and you're going to hear a lot more about communities of interest later. So the statewide database that holds all the redistricting data from the US Census Bureau for California is housed at UC Berkeley, and it makes the information available to the public. Working with the state legislature, the UC Berkeley staff create a computer application that allows anyone with access to a computer to draw a map of their own community. It's relatively simple. Draw some boundaries, give it a name, and say what it defines: a school area, a shopping area, a group with a certain ethnic population, a central landmark. Next slide. So California state redistricting is the result of a referendum that took place in 2008 that created an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. The maps adopted by the independent commission at the state level for Congress, state senator, and state representative are the maps that will be final. In other states, they have advisory commissions or the legislature itself draws the district lines. And as you'll see in this presentation, in California, we have all 3 of these methods in play. Next slide. So the California Commission has 14 members. They have a set of standards or criteria that are made explicit by the legislature and by the commission. They have public hearings, they have transparency. The California Independent Commission is very regarded by the national advocacy organizations like the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, NAACP, et cetera. There are some websites here where you can sign up to receive information and track what the California State Commission is doing. Next slide. And so the California has some ranked criteria around requiring that districts, sub-state districts have equal population comply with the federal and state Voting Rights Act. The districts have to be contiguous, i.e. in a single chunk. You can't have a blob here and a blob here and a blob there and call it a district. To the extent possible, keep boundary lines intact from city boundaries to assembly districts, et cetera. And they have other criteria around nested districts, for example, that if possible, a state Senate district contains a certain number of assembly districts. So the calendar for this is that the hearings are underway now, and the final maps will be adopted sometime in the December 2021 to February 2022 period. The Independent Commission has to transmit those maps to the Secretary of State. So a key point here is that California's 14 redistricting commissioners need to use their best judgment when considering how communities of interest are respected and included in the new district maps. They can and should go beyond meeting the bare legal requirements to draw districts that empower people to engage their representatives. And I think we're ready for Ann on the next slide. The next slide for Ann. Oh my goodness, I forgot I had an additional animation in there. Okay, Ann, here you go.
It's okay. Okay, so today our main focus is on local redistricting. Local governing bodies, including county boards of supervisors, city and town councils, school boards and community college boards, as well as special districts such as water, fire, and hospital districts, may also be included in the 2021 redistricting process. That is, if they elect their representatives by district rather than at large. As Jim explained, at large refers to a representative on a board or a council or whatever who is elected to serve an entire area rather than one of its subdivisions. The subdivisions are the election districts. Local redistricting means drawing election district maps for these levels of government. Until fairly recently, most of these maps were drawn by elected officials with few rules beyond the California Brown Act, also called the Sunshine Act, which requires that local governments conduct their business at open public hearings, open public meetings. For this round of local redistricting, there are some new laws that regulate the process, particularly for counties, cities, and towns. But different types of jurisdictions have different requirements. There are fewer requirements for special districts and educational governing bodies than for counties, cities, and towns. But all are expected to involve the public in a meaningful way in this process. We'll talk about these requirements, the rules that local jurisdictions must follow in drawing and adopting their election district maps, and best practices that the League of Women Voters and others recommend that they should follow. Finally, we'll talk about how you can have a voice in this important process. But first, let's look at who is redistricting in Marin and Sonoma counties. Next slide, please. We'll start with Marin. Our county and our two largest cities, Santa Fe and Nevada, elect their governing boards or councils by district. All the other cities and towns in Marin, and there are quite a few of them, elect their council members through at-large elections. One thing to note, some local jurisdictions, and this applies to both Marin and Sonoma, just recently went from at-large to by-district elections. Both Santa Fe and Nevada made this change in 2019. If you live in one of these cities, you may be saying, but wait, didn't we just do this? Yes, you did, but it has to be done again based on the new population numbers from the 2020 census. So this year, the county, Santa Fe and Nevada, will need to look at the new population data, take account of public input, and redraw their district maps to the extent necessary. This is a map of the current Marin County Board of Supervisors districts. It remains to be seen how closely the new district boundaries will match what you see here. One other thing, you see here on this slide, the links to the jurisdiction's redistricting websites or web pages. These governing bodies need a way of keeping the public informed about what they're doing. They can do this through a dedicated redistricting website. A website like this can also be used as a portal for public input, including opportunities to submit, review, or comment on draft maps. Having a dedicated redistricting website is strongly recommended as best practice. Some jurisdictions have their websites up and running, others don't. Our leagues, Sonoma and Marin, are keeping track of this, and we will be providing links to these redistricting websites on our own websites when they become available. Next slide, please. So, on to special districts. Several special districts in Marin are involved in redistricting this year. These are the water districts, MNWD and North Marin Water, and the Novato Fire Protection and Healthcare districts, Marin Healthcare districts. Marin Healthcare is moving from at-large to by-district elections this year, so they'll be drawing these maps for the first time. Next slide, please. Boards of Education in Marin. The County Board of Education and just 3 of our many local school districts, these are San Rafael City Schools and Novato Unified and Shoreline, elect their trustees by district. These election districts are often referred to as trustee areas. College of Marin is moving to by-district elections for the first time this year. And by the way, their website is up and they are holding their first public hearing at their board meeting tomorrow. So they are well into this process. Next, please. Now for Sonoma. The Sonoma County Board of Supervisors is redistricting. This is their current map of their 5 districts. Their website is up and running, and it is excellent, by the way. They're having a town hall meeting on redistricting this coming Wednesday. The cities of Rohnert Park and Santa Rosa and the town of Windsor elect their councils by districts, so they must redistrict this year. Windsor just went to by-district elections last year. All special districts in Sonoma elect their board members through at-large elections, so none of them are involved in the redistricting process. Next, please. These are the boards of education in Sonoma that are redistricting this year. The Sonoma County Board of Education anticipates that they will use the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors districts to define the boundaries for their 5 trustee areas. This is not final yet, but if you're interested in the redistricting of the Sonoma County Board of Education, you want to pay very close attention to the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors districts and the work on that. Santa Rosa Junior College is redistricting, as are Santa Rosa City Schools and Cotati Rohnert Park Unified. Cotati Rohnert Park went to by-district elections just last year. Information about this process is available on their website, but nothing is up yet on 2021. So this is who in Marin and Sonoma counties will be revisiting and redrawing their district maps this year. Now, Darrin Jenkins will tell us about the process of local redistricting, the criteria that jurisdictions must apply to draw their maps, the how, and the requirements they have to inform and involve the public.
Thank you, Ann. Speaking first about counties, cities, and towns, there's 2 new California laws that affect these 3 entities, and it standardizes the redistricting rules for all of us. And it put in this idea of having criteria that are in a ranked order, that as you're drawing maps, you satisfy the criteria. It has special public outreach requirements and also public hearing requirements. And so we'll go through those now. Next. So the new laws allow 3 options for how cities, counties, and towns go about redistricting. And one of them is that the governing board can opt to have an independent commission make the final decision on the new district maps. And the way that works is the board members themselves do not directly appoint the commissioners, but they adopt a process by which commissioners will be selected. For example, in one jurisdiction, they have retired judges actually picked from applicants to appoint sort of this independent commission. Another option is that the governing body can appoint an advisory commission that makes a recommendation to the governing body. And there's sort of two versions of this. In one version, the advisory commission can say, well, here's the maps we looked at, and this is the one we recommend, or several we recommend, but the board can pick any map, including those recommended or not. And then another version of this is where an advisory commission narrows it down to like 2 maps, and then the board picks one of the 2 maps, for example. And then the last one is sort of how it's traditionally been done, and that is after getting public input, the governing body itself selects the maps and the voting order for the candidates. Next. So, as I mentioned, the new laws put in place this criteria for drawing district lines. And so the very first one is, as Jim talked about, the districts have to match in terms of population, and usually that's within a certain margin, say plus or minus 5%. All the districts need to have an equal population. The second one is Voting Rights Act. There's a federal Voting Rights Act, California Voting Rights Act, that talk about minority representation, and that it needs to be drawn in a way that doesn't disenfranchise people and meet the requirements of the voting acts. And then they have to be geographically contiguous. In other words, there can't be islands that are separate from the rest of the district. They have to actually be physically touching. Different portions of an individual district have to be touching at all times. And then communities of interest, and that really is defined by the communities of interest. And so, certain neighborhoods may be a community of interest, or a historic area, for instance, or different people groups living in close proximity may be a community of interest, or like in the case of drawing district supervisor districts, a city might say, well, we think we're a community of interest and we don't want to be split, for example. Geographic integrity. This sort of gets at the idea that, maybe you don't want a big mountain range through the middle of a district that sort of provides a physical impediment, or if people identify with certain geographic areas. Compactness, picture in your mind that these are, more like circles and squares and less like an octopus, where it has sort of these tentacles going out. So that would be compactness. Do they look like sort of shapes that don't have a lot of branches coming out of them? And then looking at easily identifiable boundaries, for example, bodies of water, or sometimes freeways divide communities, and it may make sense to have that as that's a pretty clear identifiable boundary. Those are some examples. Next. So as part of the city, county, and town requirements, we're required to have 4 public hearings. And the first public hearing, we're not allowed to consider any maps. It's really to lay out the process and to get input from people about these things, exactly what we've just been talking about. Well, what are the communities of interest? And it's important to find those out and hear that input before the demographer starts drawing maps. And then there's also a good faith outreach requirement to underrepresented groups, non-English speaking communities, and for example, translating information. disseminating it through the media, good government and community organizations, for example, working with the League of Women Voters to distribute information, and then to provide live translation at the meetings if that's requested. And then we are required to have a web page for our districting project, and we have to maintain the web page for 10 years. And that's to post an explanation of what is the process and the schedule, what are going to be the opportunities for engagement. And it's also a place where we describe the mechanism by which people can provide input to that process. For example, submitting comments, or even how can people draw their own draft maps. And that can vary from using a piece of paper with the population information on it, or some jurisdictions use that combined with a spreadsheet calculator where people can enter in different information to draw their map boundaries. And then some jurisdictions will have an online tool that you can use on a website where you can draw your own boundaries, and it sort of helps with keeping the population equal. And then it's a place to post, these websites are places to post public comments and draft maps as well. Next. So it's a little bit different. Well, and one other thing I'll add for cities, counties, and towns, we are required to post the draft maps 7 days before they're considered at these public hearings. Switching now to special districts. Special districts, the law is slightly different than cities, counties, and towns. And so they are required to have equal population, and they must meet the Voting Rights Act, but they don't have the ranked criteria. They have considerations that they may consider: topography, geography, cohesiveness, contiguousness, and compactness, and communities of interest. Next. For special districts, the outreach requirements are different. They are only required to have 2 public hearings, one where they can consider a map, and the second one where they approve a map. So for special districts, it can happen very quickly. If they opt to do the absolute minimum required by law, it could be done, within 1 month. What we're recommending is that, they have a web page about redistricting. They hold 3 or more hearings before adoption and publish the map 7 days in advance so that people can review that before the meeting. Switching now away from special districts to school districts. And so these are kindergarten through 12, and also community college, county school boards, or boards of education. And the rules for them are different as well. The required criteria and outreach, again, they have to have equal population, they have to meet the Voting Rights Act, but they only have to have 1 public hearing. Next. Some recommended best practices for education districts, and this is something that you can ask them to do, is to have a web page where they lay out their schedule and process, have at least 3 hearings before they adopt the map, and publish the map 3 days in advance of adoption so that the community has a chance to review those. Talking about deadlines, so the original plan was for the census information to come out last April. And because of COVID and other things, that information didn't come out until August. So it's compressing the schedule for redistricting because we are still having elections in June for primaries and then in November. And so the time frame, we have to have the district information done so that candidates can apply to be elected officials. And so there's different deadlines depending on when the entity's next election is. So if it's between January and June of 2022, then it has to be 174 days before the election day, which if we use sort of the traditional June primary date, then these district redistricting processes need to be done by about December 16th. So as you heard from Jim, we're expecting the California processed census information that everyone has to use to come out within the next week. And so we really have places like counties where they have a June primary. They're only going to have 3 months or less than 3 months to adopt those district boundaries. So it's going to feel a little compressed in terms of time. Special districts is 180 days before election day. Community colleges and school boards, February 28th, a specific date. County Board of Education, March 1st. And then circling back up to cities, counties, and towns, for those of us who don't have primary elections, which is most of the cities and towns, we would have a November election. If you calculate back 205 days from the November election, I came up with April 18th as the date when we need to have these adopted. So, for example, in Rohnert Park, we're going to have our first hearing, I think it's October 26th, and then a series of hearings January, February, and March. And so we will, that's kind of our schedule. And I think that'll be a lot of the cities and towns will be kind of on that time frame. Next. So that's my last slide. And we've talked quite a bit about communities of interest. And so here to give you more information about that is Scott McKown.
Thanks, Darrin. I think what we'll do here in this segment is summarize what's been said throughout about communities of interest, because the public's voice in influencing the drawing of districts is conveyed in the community of interest testimony. Next slide. So we'll talk about what composes a community of interest, existing predefined communities, how to convey the community of interest message to the district line drawers, and what transparency best practices to look for from jurisdictions. A community of interest is any cohesive group of people that live in a geographically definable area and should be considered as a potential voting bloc in current or future elections. Next, as noted in the definition of communities of interest, they must exist in a single geographic defined area, and in addition, they provide a voice and access to the political process, as well as allow for community oversight of the process. They may result in the creation of final district maps that better represent all communities. A community of interest can be a neighborhood or a group of people who have common interests in local issues and decision making and would benefit from being grouped into a single district. Some examples of community of interest subject matter are common interests in schools, housing, land use, and environmental issues, or neighborhood related, such as parks and community events, or neighborhood connections with adjoining districts, or economic interests such as commercial development areas. Next, existing defined communities can be used as geographic containers for organizing community of interest. For example, there are more than 40 geographical defined communities in Marin County. There may be community interests within one or more of those defined communities that should be brought forward in the redistricting process. In other words, you have a pre-baked geographic district to use. Next, consider what's important for your community. Should all of your community be included in a single district? Or should your community be in the same district with another community? What is it about your community as it relates to others that's important for decision makers to know as they draw the district lines? Next. Community of interest influence is reinforced if presented in the context of a coalition. Forming a coalition can strengthen your message. Give consideration to who you have worked with in the past And do you share common goals on redistricting? Next. All testimony should be relevant to the resources the jurisdiction has control over. All redistricting jurisdictions must consider community of interest testimony in establishing district lines. Most will have a website or page with instructions of how to present your testimony. All testimony will be available to the public at the jurisdiction website. And if need be, the League of Women Voters can provide you with a guide to presenting testimony. Next. As mentioned earlier, the following transparency best practices for redistricting jurisdictions. In the case of counties, cities, and towns, they're mandated by law. In Marin, the mandated practices apply to only 3 of the 12 redistricting jurisdictions. While not mandated for the remaining 9, 4 special districts and 5 education jurisdictions, these practices should be given serious consideration. And at a minimum, follow the online presence recommendation. That is, create a website dedicated to redistricting and maintain it for at least 10 years. The site should include or link to a hearing calendar, notices and agendas, recordings or summaries of hearings and community of interest submissions, draft maps considered, and cross-link to other related redistricting jurisdictions, and of course, the final adopted map. Next. As for hearings, hold at least 4 hearings for the public to provide testimony about communities of interest and to describe proposed district maps. The note here is community of interest definition can be submitted at any time, even before the population data is available. Hold 1 hearing outside regular business hours. For hearings scheduled within a regular council or board meeting, provide notice for the hearing at a fixed time and begin on time. Provide at least 5-day online notice of hearings. Next, for mapping and testimony, provide a mapping tool to support community of interest and district mapping testimony, and a process for receiving drawn maps and written public comment. Provide support for appropriate languages at hearings and on the website. Finally, post that draft map, the final draft map, at least 7 days before its adoption. And with that, I'll pass the baton to Karen Weeks, who will tell you how to be involved.
Thank you, Scott. So now that you have all this information that we've provided to you, you may be asking yourself, what's next? Well, here are some ways that you can be involved. You can visit your county websites and provide comment. You can submit maps. Both the Marin County and Sonoma County websites have some exciting map drawing tools that you can use. They also have paper maps available, and you can even submit a map on the back of a napkin. You can provide comment and testimony at public hearings online and talk about your community needs. There are a couple of local meetings coming up, which Ann mentioned, but I will mention again. The College of Marin will be having a meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. And the County of Sonoma will be having a redistricting town hall on Wednesday at 4 p.m. All of those are via Zoom. So please visit the respective website for your Zoom login information. I also wanted to mention, which I believe was mentioned earlier, that we will be sending up a follow-up email to everyone who registered that has the various websites and resources. Next, please. So if you want to stay update, if you want to update on what's happening, please visit the League of Women Voters websites for both Marin and Sonoma, and visit your jurisdiction's websites for specific timelines for mapping and public input. Next, please. Here's a list of some additional resources, and these websites will be sent out in the follow-up email. and as well as email addresses for both the Marin and Sonoma County League if you have questions that we can help you with. And so with that, I turn it back over to Debbie.
So next slide. We are going to take a little moment here to do an after presentation quick poll. We want to see how this maybe has increased your knowledge. So we're going to put the poll up, and if you could check all that apply, and that's my knowledge of redistricting has not changed. I now know more about the redistricting process. I know how to become more involved in my local redistricting process, or I now have an in-depth understanding of redistricting. So if you could take a few minutes to answer those, we'd like to kind of see how we did on getting our information across. So if people could just take a few seconds to give us your answers, and then we'll report out the results. So it looks like we moved the needle a little bit. We've got more people now who know more about the redistricting process. So we're very happy about that. And people know more about how to get involved. And hopefully through the follow-up emails and visiting our website, you'll become more and more informed. You know, this is a very important process. And thanks for giving us this feedback. We're going to stop sharing the poll results now, but it's very important that you do figure out how you want to get involved. And this is going to be an ongoing process, as Darrin mentioned, that's probably going to go on over the next several months. So you can continue to increase your knowledge. You can continue to find more and more ways to get involved. But remember, we want to pick the people that represent us rather than them drawing the districts. We need to give input on how those districts are drawn. So as a quick reminder, we have asked you to wait till the end for your questions, and we're going to be moving into the Q&A. And so if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer them. If we're not able to answer them all today, we'll try and do follow-ups in the email. So I believe we do have some questions. So Karen, can you lead us off with the questions?
Sure. I'm going to start with a question, where do these mandates come from? And that is probably one of the easiest things to answer, and it comes from the California Voting Rights Act and the state constitution. So then we have a question that I think perhaps Scott or Ann can help us with. San Rafael has 3 different supervisor representatives, as the city of San Rafael is in 3 separate districts. Most towns have 1. In San Rafael, there is 1 for Lucas Valley, 1 for Central San Rafael, and 1 for the Canal area. Will this hopefully unite Central San Rafael and Lucas Valley, or make San Rafael all part of 1 district?
I'll take that one to begin with. San Rafael has the biggest population, and that's one of the problems that the map drawers have, is allocating equal population throughout the county. But this is a good community of interest exercise. In other words, best efforts should be made not to break up cities, towns, or other communities. And this is one of those. So if you have an opinion as to who you want to be included with, you can create a community of interest testimony submission and submit it.
Yeah, I would add, if I could, San Rafael's population is more than 1/5 of Marin County. So not everyone can fit into 1 district because it has more than 1/5 of the population. So there will be part of it that's split out. But you raised some good points. Like, I'll give you an example, Lucas Valley, Terra Linda, they may identify more with Marinwood in terms of their community, which is a significant population that's in an unincorporated county. And so I encourage the commenter to go on to the Marin County website and try to draw some maps. I think it'll give you a sense of how things could be divided. And you can show them, here's a map that would work, that would address my concerns. And you sort of prove what's possible, and also understand the constraints of map drawing, it is sometimes very, very difficult to make these decisions and meet all of these criteria and physically draw a map that does that.
Thank you. We have another question. Is there a comprehensive list that shows the special district number of mandated meetings and other information?
On that one, the LAFCO has a list and a map at marinmap.org of all the various organizations or divisions. Perhaps we can create a list to put on the website. We'll work on that.
Thank you.
I'll add to that. In Sonoma County, all the special districts are at-large elections, so they're not required to participate in this redistricting process. And if you visit our web pages, we each have a list of what jurisdictions in our counties, our respective counties, do have to do redistricting. So you can also find that out from our web pages.
But one of the items, Debbie, on this business of these available containers, as I call them and so forth, is that drawing maps is sometimes a difficult thing for a layperson. They give up, so you don't get that testimony submitted. But if your community of interest resides in those predefined boundaries, you've got your map. All you need is your comments submitted.
Thank you. A question of if participants can get a copy of the slides.
I don't know that we have the ability to give you a copy of the slides, but if you want to see this presentation again or share it with somebody else or share it with a group, we'd encourage you to do that through the YouTube channel. So in the next few days, we will have this presentation up on our YouTube channel, and you're more than welcome to share that with other people or watch it again, or like I say, have a group watch it.
Thank you. Do all public hearings have the option to attend via Zoom? Yes, right now with the COVID mandates, all of the public hearings are via Zoom.
Not all of them.
Not all of them. Oh,
yeah, there are some that are in person, but
do they have the option of doing Zoom as like a hybrid meeting, Darrin?
No, you in some instances you can watch online, but you can't actually comment live on Zoom, so you have to be physically present.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
It's going to depend on the jurisdiction. I think you can't count on that. You just have to pay attention to what each one is doing.
I will add that for the county of Marin, anyway, it's a hybrid, and they allow comments online. It's handled like a webinar.
And that's also the same with the county of Sonoma. We had a question. I know exactly who I want for my supervisor in San Rafael. Please say again where I can voice my opinion.
One of the dictates is you're not supposed to be drawing these districts based upon who you like as a representative.
Yeah, actually, you make that input at the polling place.
Yeah. However, you can conjure up some other way to do it. Have at it.
Yeah, Scott makes a good point. If you looked at the criteria for cities, counties, and towns, none of them said where the incumbent lives. That's one of the things that you can consider or are required to consider. And the idea is that this redistricting that we're doing now is going to, most places have election every 2 years. So it's good for 10 years. That's 5 elections that are going to use these new districts. And to think about, well, where this one person lives today, and to say we should do our next 5 elections based on where that person lives, that's just not in the public's interest, is what the state has decided. And so really not to consider incumbents keeping their seats or that type of a thing. Although, I'm sure that's in some people's minds as they're making these decisions.
I see we have a question up there.
You're muted, Karen.
I'm sorry. We have preliminary public meetings been held yet? If so, what sort of response has there been for both Marin County and Sonoma County? For Sonoma County, so far there's been 3 public meetings. There's another one tonight and then again on Wednesday. And we've had some public attendance, half dozen people maybe. So get the word out for more people to attend. Scott, do you want to talk about Marin County?
Yeah, sure. Marin held a public, I think it's 2 public hearings at this point. The first one was, first of all, they are embedded in the standard agenda for the county with a fixed time for the hearing and so forth. So that's how they're approaching it. And the first meeting was very poorly attended. And the second one is a bit better. We're looking forward to a stronger participation going forward. So I second Karen's recommendation that go look at the websites, and they've got the schedule of the meetings, and please try to attend.
One final question, unless there's any more out there that haven't popped up. Question, what was the website where you said we could voice our opinion? I'm not sure what community you're from, but we will be sending out via an email to all the participants, all of the various websites for communities where you can voice your opinion. Oh, Marin, she said. So so look at the Marin County website.
Yes, and the other thing I'd add is that not all the websites are up yet. So pick the jurisdiction that you're interested in, and they all do have websites, but they may not have a redistricting website or a section on redistricting yet, but that's coming. That's probably going to be coming in the next month or so once they get this census data. So keep checking back with the jurisdiction that you're interested in, checking their website to see if they have either a section on redistricting or if they've created a totally separate website on redistricting. So that's kind of preview of coming attractions. The County of Marin and County of Sonoma are kind of taking the lead, and their websites are up, but a lot of these other jurisdictions do not yet have dedicated websites.
And
so this is something we're going to have to monitor on an ongoing basis.
As Scott went through in the best practices, you can recommend to them that they create a website if they haven't already done so.
Absolutely.
And I think you should do that. If there is a jurisdiction you're interested in and you don't see that they have a redistricting website up yet, tell them, ask them when it's coming up. Tell them you're very interested in this, that you think it's really important, because the cities, counties, and towns are required to have them, but the other folks aren't required.
The before a website is available, contact would be through their the board section of the district's website. I'm sorry, of the jurisdiction's website, and contact either the chief executive officer or the members of the board. Let them know of your interest in having the website.
And one last thing, many jurisdictions now have the ability to subscribe to announcements. So for example, you can go on the website and say, I'm interested in districting, and then you'll get emails about all the meetings or information that's released on redistricting.
So that's it as far as our questions. And once again, you will be getting a follow-up email. Debbie, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, so if we could have the next slide, please. We want to thank the people who have helped make this presentation possible. And we want to especially thank all our panelists today, Darrin Jenkins, Jim Masters, Scott McKown, Ann Wakeley, and Karen Weeks. They did a great job. And we also want to thank Ricardo Ibarra, the Executive Director of WATSA Creative Labs, for his Spanish translation. We want to thank Alan Fitch of Visual Sora Media for the live streaming and Zoom support. And we want to thank Didi Butori and Robin Dietrich, the Marin County board members who are our fabulous Z team and work behind the scenes to make this all go smoothly. Please watch for future presentations on Making Our Democracy Work series. And most importantly, we want to thank all of you for participating today. You know, you are what makes our democracy work. And we want to really encourage you to continue to get involved in your community, get involved in this redistricting, make a difference in your community. Talk to your friends and let them know about what's going on. This is sort of flying under the radar right now that a lot of people don't even know this is going on. So start those conversations in your community to let them know this is happening. We also want to acknowledge and thank the League of Women Voters of California, who provided several of the slides that we used in our presentation today. And they likewise have a lot of information about redistricting at the California League of Women Voters website. So please check out that website as well. And as I mentioned earlier, if you haven't already voted, please go and vote today or tomorrow. Time's running out. So thank everyone for participating today, and we'll see you again in the next show.